And just for the viewers at home, we're going to let you in on this one weird trick that means even you can spend £1 billion on players over the course of 2 seasons and get away with it. How does he do it? Doctors hate him. Roman Abramovich was not strapped for cash. The former Chelsea owner pumped over £1.5 billion into Chelsea Football Club over the course of his tenure and propelled the club into a golden era. Abramovich injected around £700 million into the club in a 5-year period between him taking ownership in 2004 until FFP regulations came in 2009, and then a further £800 million from 2010 until 2021 when he was forced to sell the club. The money fueled Chelsea's rise as they won their first Premier League title since 1955 in 2005, and then won it 4 more times further. The club won everything there was to possibly win in Europe, including the Champions League twice. A forced high-profile change in ownership during the summer of 2022 came with an interesting air of uncertainty around the club. And with a Todd Boehly-led Clear Lake consortium at the helm and Roman's oil money now long gone, many expected a big change in the way the football club would be run. Less high-profile spending, savvier transfers, and a sensible, sustainable way of guaranteeing a return on investment for all of the new investors. In Roman Abramovich's entire time as owner of Chelsea Football Club, he never spent more than £300 million in a single season. Chelsea, under Todd Boehly, have smashed this figure twice already. Chelsea's spending has left everyone, inside and outside of the game, scratching their heads. Jurgen Klopp has questioned how it's possible Chelsea have been able to do this, while also openly admitting that he simply doesn't, quote, understand this part of the business. Guardiola commented that if City had spent what Chelsea has spent in the last 2 transfer windows, that you'd, quote, kill me, and, quote, we'd be under scrutiny like you couldn't imagine. As with all things modern football, talk radio shows and online discussion have been inundated with claims of corruption, claims of collusion between the Premier League and Chelsea Football Club, and confusion at how this could all be possible. And as always, a lot of the outcry also contains a small undertone of jealousy to go with it. If Chelsea can do it, then why isn't the club I support doing it? A ticking time bomb or a genius master plan? Just how on earth have Chelsea been able to spend £1 billion on player transfers? How will it turn out on the pitch? And what if it all comes crashing down? Before we go any further, I just need to pause here and shout out to the Swiss Ramble and his article regarding Chelsea finances over on his personal Substack page. All of my sources are listed in the description for every video on this channel, but I felt like this one especially needs a shout out, as this video wouldn't have been possible to make without it. The Swiss Ramble constantly puts out the best pieces around football club finances, and you should absolutely check out his Twitter and his Substack, both of which are linked in the description. As Chelsea Football Club searched for new ownership, they found themselves in a unique position. When an owner of a football club decides it's time to sell, it's usually down to 1 or 2 reasons. Either A, the club has hit such a dire financial situation that the current owners are willing to cut their losses, move on from their headache and pass the debt onto someone else. Think Bolton Wanderers or Portsmouth in recent years. Or B, a football club is regarded as having huge potential for growth, and the current ownership is simply offered a sum they can't refuse. Think Wrexham or think Newcastle United. This simply wasn't the case for Chelsea at the start of 2022. As part of UK sanctions towards Russia due to their ongoing participation in the conflict in Ukraine, Roman Abramovich was forced to give up the ownership of the club, giving way to an unprecedented opportunity for a prospective new owner. With the forced handover from Abramovich to Boehly's Clear Lake Consortium, it seems that Roman Abramovich has simply written off the 1.5 billion in debt the club owed him. A last parting gift and a goodbye to the Chelsea faithful, or a calculated move to cut his losses, wipe his hands clean, and then dissuade the UK authorities from investigating his finances any further. However you want to frame it, Chelsea Football Club were now debt-free. This means that they could take on a fair bit of debt and still owe less than many of their peers in the Premier League. With lots of room to manoeuvre, Todd Boehly got to manoeuvring, and oh boy did he manoeuvre all over everyone. A period of spending to revitalise the team, stamp his new authority and usher Chelsea into a new era was to be expected, but the sheer amount of money spent and the speed in which they've spent it simply could not have been. These three graphs created by the Swiss RAMBLE all show the same picture. Premier League gross spend in the 23-24 season, gross spend on transfers since Boehly's arrival, and highest ever gross spends on transfers per season since the Premier League began all show this new look Chelsea dwarfing everyone else. The £872 million that Chelsea have spent since Boehly's arrival is more than twice as much as the next highest English club. These figures were produced in an article published on the 21st of August, and when you add in agents' fees, performance-based bonuses, and the transfer deadline day purchase of Cole Palmer for a reported £40 million, it's safe to assume Boehly has hit the £1 billion mark. But what about financial fair play? The Premier League has its own rules regarding club spending, and if Chelsea are to make a return to Europe, they'll have to answer to UEFA as well. So how have they been able to do this? It's time to introduce a word that by now, if you've been paying any sort of attention to Chelsea's financial situation, you may well already be sick of hearing. I know I am. But unfortunately, there's no getting around it, and we can't talk about Chelsea spending without talking about amortization. Amortization is a common accounting term which refers to the action or process of gradually writing off the initial cost of an asset. Or at least that's what it says when I Google it. All businesses use some form of amortization in their accounting, be it a football club or otherwise, and every football team across the globe records their transfers in this way. It takes some getting your head around, but the way football clubs record and log their transfer spending is simply just not the same as the way you or I may think about it. Of course, football clubs employ experts whose job it is to budget for player accruals and to ensure that they meet financial fair play guidelines and regulations over a set period. But unlike a FIFA career mode or football manager, teams simply don't have one big pot of money that they add to and subtract from neatly. When booking the expense a player has cost to the football club to acquire their services, football clubs take whatever the total transfer may be, the total wages to be paid across the length of the contract offered, agents' fees, potential bonuses and all the rest, and then spread that cost over the length of the contract. To keep things simple, let's say a club signs a player all in, wages and all, for £100 million. The contract the player signs is a 5-year deal, so clubs will book this expense in as 100 million spread over 5 years, 20 million per year. If you can just forget that we're talking about humans here and instead pretend you're buying a yacht or something, it kind of makes sense. You're going to have the yacht for 5 years, it costs you 100 million, so you might as well count it as 20 million a year for 5 years. All that really matters is that the number on the page will pass financial fair play regulations when the authorities come around to look at the books, and amortizing assets in this way is an effective method to help clubs do this. And everyone does it. There's no story here and there's no surprises. The trick, however, is the length of the period that Chelsea are doing their amortization over. Chukwuemeka, Cucurella and Chalobah are on 5-year deals. Nkunku, Fofana and Colwill are on 6. Sanchez, Badiashile, Madueke, Lavia, Gusto and Palmer are on 7. Jackson, Mudryk, Enzo Fernandez and Caicedo are all contracted to the club until 2031 on unprecedented 8-year contracts. Earlier, I used an example of a £100 million player amortised over a 5-year contract to effectively equate to 20 million a year when looking at the books. The 100 million spent on Caicedo is being amortised over 8. So when the Premier League go to check the record books, it simply states that they've spent 12.5 million on acquiring the Brighton midfielder this year and will pay 12.5 million for 7 years thereafter. When we also consider the amount of Chelsea Academy products that have been sold over the last 3 seasons, such as Mason Mount, Lewis Hall, Tammy Abraham, Fikayo Tomori, Mark Gahey and Billy Gilmore, all of which will be booked as pure profit in accounting terms, as, well, Chelsea never paid a transfer fee for them in the first place, plus the sales of some high wage earners from their squad, such as Rudiger and Marcus Alonso, it becomes slightly less of a wonder why Chelsea have been so bullish in the transfer market. We could get bogged down here with the pure numbers regarding whether or not Chelsea are going to pass financial scrutiny from both the Premier League and from UEFA. However, every article I've read that's tried to crack the numbers have all been filled with caveats, assumptions and potential loopholes that Chelsea may or may not be able to exploit. How much more lucrative will the new broadcasting rights be for the Premier League come the next round of talks? How much will Chelsea earn if, over the next 3 years, they make it back to the newly formatted Champions League? Did you know that due to the COVID-19 pandemic, Chelsea can apply for special circumstance exceptions to certain expenditures? Did you know that the Premier League are adjusting the periods in which they will evaluate a club's finances from next season so they no longer include the COVID-19 seasons, so they can begin a fresh slate? Did you know that according to Article 104 of the 2022 UEFA Financial Fair Play Edition, it notes that Articles 58 to Articles 64 of the 2018 UEFA Financial Fair Play Edition would apply as a, quote, transitional provision in respect to club monitoring. I didn't. In fact, I'm still not entirely sure what any of that means. Either way, I truly believe that the sheer fact that Chelsea have made the moves in the transfer windows like they have is because they're confident that it's all above board and that there's a comparatively low chance of being punished for it. Todd Boehly is many things, but he's not stupid. Coming from years of being a part owner of the LA Dodgers and being the figurehead for an investment fund where it's his literal job to be insured with handling all of the money from all of the very wealthy and powerful investors, Todd Boehly is simply not out here sanctioning all of these expensive transfers without the due diligence for each one being done. This is, of course, not to say that there won't be problems and roadblocks down the line, but for now, I'm confident in the fact that Chelsea do have a system and a plan here to make sure that they remain above board. This is not a new dictatorship that's gone mad with power. The guidelines for both the Premier League and UEFA when it comes to finances are clear and are in black and white. And they surely would have been scrutinised to death by some of the very best financial and legal experts in the country before Chelsea Football Club were given the green light to even spend a penny. So, while no one should expect Chelsea to be hit with a points deduction or tumble into administration anytime soon, that doesn't mean that there aren't wider problems here that could be catastrophic to Chelsea Football Club. Yes, it'll all be alright on the books when the tax man comes knocking, but football isn't played on a spreadsheet and you can't amortise the ball into the back of the net. And shit, did I miss one? Okay, try again. And you can't amortise the ball into the back of the net. Fuck it, I'm leaving that in. There are just so many factors here to consider. Firstly, as Rory Smith of the BBC has pointed out, you can record a transfer fee across 8 years in your own accounting books, but you aren't paying the selling club that figure over those years. Chelsea can claim Caicedo is actually a 12.5 million a year investment for 8 years, but they aren't paying Brighton in 8 instalments. That massive transfer fee will most likely be paid in 2 or 3, and forgetting how they log it all in their books, do Chelsea have the cash on hand to simply do that? Could this possibly be why, as this ESPN article from September 2023 states, they are looking for new investors already? Secondly, every calculation I've seen regarding Chelsea's finances for the foreseeable future assume that Chelsea will, at some point sooner rather than later, benefit from being back into an elite European competition and tasting that sweet, sweet Champions League money or Europa League money once more. Part of my brain simply just assumes that a club like Chelsea will eventually find their way and reach the Champions League once more, even if it takes a few years. But with the way things are going right now on the pitch, is that really safe to assume? By the looks of things, Chelsea can just about go another year or even 2 with no European football. But 3 or 4? Is it simply too absurd to suggest that the other big 5 plus Newcastle, Brighton and the odd surprise package like Aston Villa may just pip them a few too many times in the league? Thirdly, another big assumption is that Chelsea continues to sell well in upcoming transfer windows. As mentioned previously, much of this ludicrous spending has been facilitated by flogging off many of their highly regarded academy products. But how many are left to do this with? Conor Gallagher, Reece James, Armando Broja, and we're sort of running out already. Then they'll have to move on to selling some of their recently purchased players who simply haven't worked out. And with the way football transfers work and the sheer amount of transfers that they've made, it's practically guaranteed that some won't. I don't know, I just feel like it's a very dangerous game. It's all well and good to say, you know, we've bought Mudryk for 70 million, and if he's not very good, we'll get rid of him for 40. But will they? I think there's somewhat of an expectation in football that if a player doesn't work out, or if they get injured, or if they're no longer wanted, that the club can easily get some return on investment. I've seen many a fan calculate just how lucrative a potential summer war chest for their club may become if they sell off various squad players and deadwood for transfer fees they've plucked from thin air. But how often does this actually happen? The fact is, the vast majority of football clubs want players who are playing regularly and have shown their value recently. Just 3 seasons ago, Arsenal paid a reported £70 million for Nicolas Pepe and haven't been able to find a single club willing to pay a transfer fee and match his wages since then. This season, he's been sent on another loan to the Turkish Super League and will run out his Arsenal contract with absolutely zero return on investment. A similar situation appears to be playing out for Nuno Tavares, who will most likely run out his contract on loan and provide no return on investment for Arsenal Football Club. You could make the argument that younger players with better potential and with lower wage demands simply have more market value and potential suitors, but just look at an example like Dele Alli, who Everton can't shake from their wage book for love nor money. Even if we forget all of the squad building theory, let's think about how these long contracts may affect players on the pitch. I don't mean to generalise here, but is it wrong to think that there may be some psychological effect to tying all these players down for 6 or 7 or 8 years? Of course, all players are different and there are as many exceptions to this as there are examples, but how many times have we seen a player sign a new lucrative deal at a football club only for their form to just fall off a cliff? Surely, even if it is minimal, there must be a small voice in the back of some of these players' heads that says, well, I'm playing poorly, but I'm contracted for another 6 years, so really, what are they going to do about it? Complacency may even set in when the team are performing well, if it's obvious that there's no room for any new recruits to come in and compete for places. The more you think about it, the more mad this whole thing gets. Who have these players even been bought for? Potter? Well, he's gone. Pochettino? Who's to say how long he lasts? What if the next manager doesn't like some of them? What if they fancy entering the transfer market yet again for someone else? Again, in most of these articles I've seen regarding Chelsea's endeavour to sneak just under financial fair play limits, not one assumes that this level of spending can continue. It remains to be seen, but it sure does feel like Chelsea have totally front-loaded their entire transfer budget for the next 4 or 5 seasons into 2 windows, like they're a child telling their mum that a new puppy can be both Christmas and birthday presents rolled into one. Although, of course, in this analogy, the puppy in question is a Ukrainian winger who has scored a grand total of 9 league goals in the Ukraine First Division. On first draft of this script, the video ended roughly here. As made obvious by my tone throughout, my evaluation of Chelsea's business planning and squad building is hardly a positive one. I wrote a conclusion which basically amounted to saying that none of this is going to work, football doesn't work the same way baseball does, and Boehly doesn't have enough experience to be making radical moves like he has been. But then I let it sit on my hard drive for a while, and well, the more I think about it, the more I'm actually coming around to the idea of all of this, the bigger picture, the forest through the trees, and trusting the process. As outlined so far, this Chelsea strategy has risks, massive risks. But so do all of the best and most revolutionary strategies across sport. It's a new way of thinking, it's a fresh take on squad building and investment in a team, and until the house of cards falls, who's to say this doesn't potentially change everything? Squad building in elite football has seemed relatively formulaic across clubs for years and years now. Basically, every elite team has a squad which contains a mix of experience and youth, 2 players to cover each position, longer contracts for younger players, and a reluctance to offer older players the same deal. And even if a club were to follow the rulebook on how to build a football squad, circumstance often gets in the way and just messes the whole thing up regardless. Manchester United aren't really out here making crazy transfer moves as part of some galaxy brain play to build the best football squad in the world, and yet their squad is still a bit of a mess, isn't it? They've mostly followed the rulebook and have still somehow ended up in a situation where they've had no functional number 9 for years now and are currently having to play 35-year-old Johnny Evans at centre-back. If you're going to dream big, you have to go big. I think it's fair to say that the team needed a refresh following their Champions League victory in 2021, and if you're going to hit the refresh button, why not smash the thing with the biggest hammer you can find? Chelsea's strategy is bold, it's brazen, it could be disastrous, but importantly, it's no half measure. And I simply can't help but respect the audacity of all of it. Maybe this way of thinking is precisely what is needed to tackle the likes of Manchester City, who have been the unstoppable force of English football for years now. Most teams in the league aspiring to be more seem to me like they're simply just trying to imitate Manchester City as closely as they can, with fleeting results. Chelsea are by no means a financially poor football club, don't get me wrong, but they don't quite have the same level of resources Manchester City do. So if you're trying to not only catch them but to knock them off their perch, what good is it to simply copy everything that they're doing? If all goes well, and yes, that's a big if, Chelsea have tied down some of the best young players on the planet for 6, 7, 8 or more years. Hypothetically, let's say Chelsea did the smart thing and simply waited to see who out of Caicedo, Enzo Fernandez, Madueke, Palmer, Mudryk, Badiashile and Cuckoo or Lavia hit the big time. And for the sake of argument, let's say half of those become elite world beaters. How many could Chelsea persuade to come to Stamford Bridge once every elite club in football would be vying for their signature? 1, maybe 2? Well, Chelsea have all of these players contracted to their football club right now. They have a team of youngsters, all of whom knew, before signing on the dotted line, that they would be part of one of the most daring projects in world football, and they would be working through this process together and as a team. And Enzo Fernandez, Caicedo and Lavia midfield three sounds pretty class right now, let alone a potential future where these three have played week in and week out for Chelsea together for 8 years. Play that amount of football alongside anyone for 8 straight years, and they'd probably all gain the ability to speak telepathically to each other. There's going to be some unbelievably painful teething stages throughout all of this. I think you can see the evidence already this season. But if Chelsea can hold their nerve here, there's a unique opportunity for these players to bond. They're all in this together through the good times and the bad, and sharing these experiences alongside each other could be a fantastic opportunity to grow and to synergize. Look, I know all of this is nuts. It's nuts, isn't it? It's genuinely crazy. The footballing world really hasn't seen anything like this before. It's so unbelievably easy to scoff at new radical ideas in sport, and I wouldn't hold it against you if you're scoffing at this one. There's every possibility that Todd Boehly drives the Chelsea bus straight off the cliff, but just maybe it could just work. In baseball, the introduction of an idea like Moneyball was written off by many, but now analytics and data is a fundamental core of every successful baseball franchise. It's easy to write off this Chelsea process, but it's these types of moves that can revolutionise the game, if it all pays off. And whether you're a neutral, a Chelsea fan, or maybe Manchester City looking over their shoulder, isn't it, at least a little bit, actually quite exciting? If you do a Google for happiest man alive, there's a bunch of articles about an ordained Buddhist monk who scientists have claimed is the happiest man on earth. And the question I'd like to ask these scientists is, have they considered Graham Potter right at the moment Ollie Watkins slotted the ball past Sanchez to beat Chelsea 1-0 this past weekend?